Alrighty, so today marks the first day of February, and February, of course, is also Black History Month in America. So I thought this was a great time to talk about this particular celebration's history. So here we are, the history of Black History Month. Alrighty, of course, so Black History Month is a very interesting time frame and just a very interesting situation all within itself. If anyone were to ask me, of course, before me making this video, what Black History Month was, I would more than likely just say it was a celebration of Black people with insight on the lesser known Black people who also equally made major contributions to the creation of this nation, right? So there's 1 month out of every year dedicated to Black people and the contribution to the creation of this nation. Now I'm just gonna give my views on, what Black History Month has turned into, or at least how I had been receiving it for a while. So what's interesting about this month is a generous amount of these people were prevalent, living, and active around the same time that a lot of other major historical events and characters are given to us. But it seems that apparently these Black people and a lot more are often left out of that major mainstream historical narrative, and it's all crammed into that 28 days of the year. And in all honesty, out of all my years of living, this celebration is never expansive. It's only ever revolving. And by that, I kind of mean when it comes to Black history, to me, like Black History Month, the month itself, it's like usually for 28 days, the same narrative repeated over and over again, as if there are not other major contributors to this time frame as well. Another thing I noticed about the Black History Month celebrated in America is they usually go to their usual go-to, which is our Black inventors of the 1800s. I like Black inventors of the 1800s, don't get me wrong. But I just be looking for a little bit of variety sometimes, I don't feel like we get much of a celebration of Black banks or no celebration of Black businesses being owned in massive droves, even though we've seen in my previous videos there were massive Black cities with prevalent businesses and prevalent political figures. But of course, there's no celebration of Black soldiers that fought all these pre-Civil Wars and Civil Wars and all these different wars. No celebration of the continuous inventors of Black people that's ever growing. It's just literally mostly shrouded in giving credit and thanks to all the Black inventors from the 1800s. Okay, whatever. It's just a pattern I've noticed. But enough about me, right? Let's get into this history. So, what is Black History Month? Right? Well, according to Wikipedia, Black History Month is an annual observance originating in the United States, where it's also known as African American History Month, that began as a way of remembering important people and events in the history of African diaspora. Okay, that's the narrative that we're gonna go with. Okay, so moving right along into blackhistorymonth.gov, I'm assuming this is the official website for, I guess, Black History Month, which I didn't really know existed much, I guess. But on this site, it said that Carter G. Woodson believed that truth could not be denied, and that reason would prevail over prejudice. His hopes to raise awareness of African Americans and their contributions to civilization was realized when he and the organization he founded, which was called the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, ASNLH, conceived and announced Negro History Week in 1925. All right, nice start. Let's get a little deeper, right? Let's get into this history. So in 1913, African Americans in New York celebrated the 50th anniversary of Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation with a 10-day exposition. Cool beans. It was led by W.E.B. Du Bois and members of the New York State Commission, right? This exhibition was said to have served the purpose of uplifting African Americans and refuting the violence, poverty, and stereotypes promoted by the mainstream. And of course, this exposition was like many of the expositions of that time. It was grand. This exposition had 14 classes of exhibits, including African industries, health and physique, labor and house service, traits and businesses, agriculture, education, religion, women, etc. This exhibition also held a historical pageant during 4 different days with 250 actors in full costume and orchestra music composed by Major Charles Young of the United States Army and others. Even the distinct poet at the time, James Weldon Johnson, composed a poem that was published in the New York Times. So I guess we can kind of see how major this was in 1913 in New York. And then over in Pennsylvania around the same time, well, in 1913, they too were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation signing with a grand exposition on their end. But for them, they gained a lot of scrutiny because they secured over $100,000 in state funds to create their exposition. But it received a lot more backlash in general because there was a lot of racial conflicts, especially with the white-owned Philadelphia newspapers, who would often portray the event as a corrupt scheme to funnel public money into the pockets of the ruling Republican Party. Now, I'm just going to be honest with you, I'm going to have to cover this particular exposition in a separate video in the future, because apparently, after 1913, the site of the Emancipation Exposition was landscaped by the Olmsted brothers of Brookline, Massachusetts. And in 1926, they completed their park in that area and set an 80-foot tall electrified Liberty Bell in the area. And I'm just gonna say, even going as far as renaming the area completely. But yeah. So what we can see now here is Black people in 1913 were displaying their achievements in the 50th year of the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. But here's where things get, of course, interesting. 2 years later, we now have the National Half Century and Lincoln Jubilee Exposition, right? So this exposition pretty much was a month-long exhibition that took place in Chicago, Illinois in 1915. It was supposed to celebrate the 50th year since the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. But wait, didn't we do that in 1913? Wasn't that the 50th year the Emancipation Proclamation was signed? Okay, moving right along. It's said that both Black and white people constructed and organized the exposition. But again, who funded, started, and promoted this exhibition is literally shrouded in pure mystery. You know what? I'm just gonna be honest. The entire exhibition in 1915 is shrouded in mystery. Well, the exhibitions in 1913, there was a lot of information concerning those exhibitions. And now we have another exposition that's supposed to be about the exact same thing 2 years later, with very little information about the founders and organizers. But okay. But at this exhibition, though, at this one particular exhibition that was held 2 years later, that's supposed to be a direct reflection of the exhibition held, again, 2 years prior, we do end up with the founding of what's known as the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. This marks the beginning of this organization. Their story starts here at the Half Century Lincoln Jubilee Exposition. This association is a non-profit organization that was started in Chicago, Illinois in 1915. The same organization was then incorporated in Washington, D.C. the following month as the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. Its founders are Carter G. Woodson, William B. Hartgrove, George Cleveland, Hall Alexander Jackson, and James E. Stamps. The mission of this organization is to promote research, preserve, interpret, and disseminate information about Black life, history, and culture to the global community. In 1926, Negro History Week was created by this group, the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. And according to the narrative, this week was dedicated to the second week of February because it coincided with the birthday of Abraham Lincoln on February 12th and that of Frederick Douglass on February 14th. By the early 1930s, Negro History Week was booming, but its creator, Woodson, began to notice a pattern that he was becoming disdained with, and his complaints were leading towards what he called the intellectual charlatans, black and white, popping up everywhere, seeking to take advantage of the public interest in Black history. It said that he would warn teachers not to invite speakers who had less knowledge than the students themselves. There also was a rise in publishing houses that had previously ignored Black topics and Black authors that began to rush putting out books on the market and in schools. And the amount of instant experts that were everywhere was ridiculous around this time. There were even a lot of non-scholarly works that were popping up everywhere from these randomized mushroom presses at the time. But by 1937, Negro History Week was becoming massive. And pretty much so much so to the point to where mayors across the nation were issuing Negro History Week proclamations. And even in places like Syracuse, New York, a lot of progressive white people joined Negro History Week with that of National Brotherhood Week. Now, let's not forget it's the 40s, so everything's still segregated. And it's said throughout the South, in the 40s, around this time, many Black schools began to teach Negro history as a supplement to United States history. And a lot of freedom schools at the time incorporated Black history into their curriculum as well. And this pretty much was the formula that went on for the next 20 years. In the early 1960s, a cultural activist from Chicago named Frederick Hammurabi started celebrating Negro History Month at his cultural center, the House of Knowledge, to fuse African consciousness with the study of the Black past. By the mid-1960s, going into the early 70s, there was a massive resurgence of Black intellectual knowledge and consciousness, self-love, and awareness. Now, with all this going on, these are now the youth that received a lot of that information growing up. Black History Month was first proposed by Black educators and the Black United students at Kent State University in February 1969. On January 2nd, 1970, Kent State celebrated its first Black History Month. The Association of the Study of African American Literature, Life, and History began to push for the extension from Negro History Week to Negro History Month, and in 1976, they succeeded. In that same year, President Gerald Ford recognized Black History Month during the celebration of the United States bicentennial. He urged Americans to see this opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history. 10 years later, in 1986, Congress would pass a public law, which is Law 99-244, which designated February 1986 as National Black or African American History Month, and it noted that February 1st, 1986 would mark the beginning of the 60th annual public and private salute to Black history. All right. Also, since 1996, every president has issued annual proclamations for National Black History Month. Side note, Carter G. Woodson, I think he was a pretty interesting guy. As I read into, the founder, I noticed he spoke much on the idea that his goal was to make sure that black people could learn of their past, but on a daily basis. And he looked to what he called forward to a time when an annual celebration would no longer be necessary. He believed Black history was too important to America and to the world to be crammed into a limited time frame. So he spoke of and what he desired, which was no longer a Negro History Week, but a Negro History Year. And I just thought that that was notable. But yeah, here we have it. The history of Black History Month. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope I was able to shed a little light on the history of how this month came into existence and why, whether or not we agree with it, it should always be recognized. Always feel free to like, share, and subscribe. If you got something to say, which I always encourage, leave a comment. And yeah, namaste. Lit.